Welcome to the show Gold Squadron Gays. It's the podcast where two Star Wars loving gays talk about and review their favorite Star Wars content while also being gay as hell. I'm your host, Bradley Brower.
I'm your other host, Charles Rogers, and I'm very tired.
Oh, please enlighten us of this new revelation of your life.
I know, shocking that a millennial would be exhausted, even though that's kind of our thing. That's our whole vibe. No, I was at, as I'm sure you probably heard in the last episode, I was at Fan Expo in Denver last weekend. I had never been to Denver, and Denver is a very cool place. It did spend most of the time trying to do me in with the elevation, but otherwise, yeah, it's hard to breathe in Denver.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
It takes a minute to set in. It takes just a minute. You get off the plane and you're like, I'm fine. And then you get to baggage claim and you're like, why is it so hard to breathe? So I had a lovely time at Fan Expo. I was a little out of it, so I did get to meet some people. Hello, if you're listening, it was lovely to meet you. I was a little out of it because we also had some family stuff going on, which led to me having to divert my flight on Monday that was supposed to take me back to LA to Florida. So I just got back 2 days ago.
That's crazy.
I'm very tired, Bradley. I'm worn out, so obviously the best way to deal with that is to talk at length about an episode of which I have many, many notes because this is my favorite episode of the show.
That's right. You did tease that last week. This is your favorite
episode. Tease that. Yes. All right. Well, Bradley, do we want to dive into this episode as soon as humanly possible? Because I need to talk about this episode. I have so much to say. Oh, before we do, I do have one note from the last episode that I want to bring up.
Okay.
Luckily, I wrote this down. Otherwise, I would have completely forgot about it in my excitement to talk about Identity Crisis. So, friend of the show, Hope. Hi, Hope. Friend of the show, Hope, listened to our last episode on the Asajj Ventress episode and pointed out something interesting that I had never thought about. And she pointed out that this is yet another case in which Tech's absence is felt from the plot. I'm obviously paraphrasing her words here. But she pointed out that because Tech is really the only one. Echo kind of did this in season 1, but Tech is the only one who really sat down and had a conversation with a separatist back in season 2, episode 1, and learned empathy for the separatists. He would have engaged Ventress in a much different way. And the fact that he is not there is part of why the 3 members of the batch who are have such an adverse reaction to her presence. So this is yet another case where Tech could have fixed the plot by being here. And he did not fix the plot because he is dead.
I don't love that, but I just find that funny that yet another reason that the removal of this character from the plot is just causing more problems for everyone because he could have engaged with this in a much different way. So thank you, Hope. I thought that was a really interesting perspective. I had completely forgot about the Sereno episodes of season 2. Anyway, now we can talk about Identity Crisis. This week we're talking about The Bad Batch Season 3, Episode 10, Identity Crisis, where Emerie confronts the dark secrets behind Hemlock's scientific research. Charles, what's one thing you liked about this episode and one thing you did not?
One thing I really liked about this episode was the fact that the Batch wasn't in it. And now, to be clear, I like them a lot. Yes. I like them as characters. But going all the way back to season 1, I really like episodes of a show that focus on side characters. And the main characters don't overpower them. So in season 1, we had that really great episode on Ryloth, where it was just about the team on Ryloth. And the Batch was just kind of there, incidentally, to set up their appearance later on. In this one, the Batch doesn't even show up at all. Omega's not here at all. But we're seeing the effects that Omega had on Emerie Carr. And I think that's also interesting to explore with a character like Omega, not just what is she going through, but what effect is she having on other people. One thing I disliked about this episode is nothing. I was trying to think of things before the episode, and I couldn't think of a single thing that I disliked about this episode. I struggle very, very hard with it. Maybe, because we're going to get to it, maybe we could have had a little more on the backstory between Emerie and Nala Se. We get one line that's really interesting between the two of them. But I do wish maybe we could add a couple more lines exploring that relate past relationship between them, but that's like the only thing that I'm like, maybe we could have gotten some more of this. What about you, Bradley? One thing you liked and one thing you did not.
My thing that I liked about this episode was, in fact, that it was a Emery-centric episode. I felt like this was such a win for Jennifer Corbett and like the writing team that like, hey, let's give this character that was really just a random side character in the second season, and then all of a sudden became this major component of season three.
Oh, she
And like,
randomly turns up at the end. She's not even a side
yeah,
character. She randomly turns up at the end of.
right. And then now she's got a full entire episode devoted to her. I thought that was so smart. That was like the one thing I really loved about this. You're right. Is the fact that the batch was not here. They weren't missed, in my opinion. I mean, I think Omega was like felt in this episode, but didn't have to be there. So like that was really smart of them. The thing I did not like about this episode, I didn't like how it felt short to me. I think it's because the way it ends, it just kind of ends. It doesn't have like I mean, and then to be fair, that's because technically there were two episodes that aired at the same time when this came out. Episode 11 also aired at the same time, so it was a back-to-back kind of situation again. So the second one, I don't really remember too much what happens in the next episode, but I do know that does carry over a little bit plot wise. So I think that's probably what I didn't like was it felt in because of the way we're covering it, it felt a little like, oh, okay, it's over. Like, but I know that when I watched it, I didn't feel that originally because I had the second episode to help support a little bit. So
Yeah, and I think it goes back to consistently like these shows are being written now to be streamed. Like particularly with these back couple of episodes.
yeah,
You can really tell that they were kind of written to be like watched in order one right after the other, that they were not weekly releases. And I think the first season and the second season kind of handled this better than the third season did, in my opinion. This is the thing. I really like the third season of The Bad Batch. I do think it is noticeable that it's written much different than network television would be.
right.
Speaking of the writing, I was gonna say I just real fast. Normally we put it at the end. By the way, this episode was directed by Saul Ruiz. I normally put it at the end, but I googled who actually wrote this episode, and it was someone named Amanda Rose Munoz.
Okay.
Amanda Rose Munoz has written mostly just episodes of this show. She is a script coordinator and script supervisor on a lot of the Star Wars shows. They were production assistant, apparently, on Kung Fu Panda 3, is their only non-Lucasfilm thing. But she was a script coordinator and script supervisor on basically all of the main Star Wars animation shows. And fun fact, actually, I'm going to drop this on you. You know what else Amanda Rose Munoz has written? Season 1, episode 13, Infested.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, so we went from Infested to this.
well, I can safely say she's been redeemed in my eyes.
Yes.
And you know
Definitely,
what?
definitely we can see the growth.
Proof that
The good
everyone
work.
deserves a second chance. Yeah. So
Well,
there
so
you go.
Amanda Rose Munoz, I am going to say, has done more hits than misses.
Okay. Well, to be fair,
Yes,
yeah.
she wrote Infested, which you know our opinion on Infested, but also as a shout out, she wrote Decommissioned in season 1, episode 6, which I believe was the episode. Let me double check. Yeah, it's the Martez sisters episode
Okay.
from season 1. Wrote The Solitary Clone,
Oh,
episode
okay.
3 of the second season, and will also write Identity Crisis, this one, and the next episode, and Flash Strike, which are all really good episodes.
Yeah. Okay. I can kind of see that.
Also, jumping ahead to what we're covering afterwards, Amanda Rose Munoz also wrote the 3 Morgan Elsbeth episodes,
Oh,
Tales of the Empire.
very interesting.
Yes, so that's who the writer on this episode is that I'm going to spend a bunch of time praising.
Okay. I like that.
And I just did that ahead of time instead of at the end like I'm supposed to.
Section 1. Our episode opens in a marketplace where a Harlefar mother leaves her infant while she shops. The baby accidentally breaks a vase, leading to suspicions from locals about its abilities. An Aqualish nearby reports the baby to a bounty hunter. Meanwhile, on Tantus, Dr. Hemlock promotes Emerie Carr to chief medical scientist. He brings her up to speed on Project Necromancer, which involves children with high M counts in the vault. Hemlock reveals the importance of Omega's blood for their experiments and the need to find her.
I have so many fucking notes for this section. Okay. Tarlafars! We have seen them before in Solo, a Star Wars story, which is their first appearance. They will appear in this episode and then 3 subsequent episodes of The Bad Batch, basically anytime the baby shows up. And most notably, a Tarlafar recently appeared in the Acolyte episode Day.
I like that. I wonder who brought that up to you when we were watching it and then was like, look, there's a hamster person in the background.
It was definitely one Bradley Brower who, over the past 3.5 years we've been making this podcast, has started to notice these things, whether he wants to or not.
I know. No, I was literally the real life Wolf of Wall Street meme where I was like, ooh, there
Oop,
it is, right
there it
there.
is. It's right there. There's also a Selkath in that. We don't have time to get into the Acolyte. We cannot talk. There's a blanket moratorium on us talking about the Acolyte
Right.
on this show because we won't shut up about the Acolyte. Apparently, the baby's name is Baron and the mother is Eilish.
Okay. And do you know who they're voiced by?
I can look it up. They are both voiced by the same person, which is Shelby Young.
Yes,
Who
Shelby
we
Young
have
has
talked
come
about
to voice
before on this
yet another
show.
character in Star Wars.
Yet another Shelby Young. Yet another Shelby Young character.
Yes, I'm realizing she's kind of the catch-all voice now for Star Wars. It seems like she just
There's a couple of catch-alls.
Yeah.
Like other people who are in this episode include Steven Stanton, who voices a lot of different people, and Steve Blum, who voices a lot of different people. And particularly one other really big Star Wars voice, but we're going to get to him in the next section. So here's my question, right? Baby has the Force, guy sees it, and goes and calls like a number.
Right.
Right? Here's my question. Is there like a bounty hunter tip line?
I would assume so. I mean,
Is
this
there
clearly
just
is
like
all
a
it is.
number you can call, like,
Yeah, it's
to
one
be
eight
like,
hundred. There's a baby with Force powers.
and here's what
That's all.
got me, like, if the Bad Batch has to go to Fennec Shan to find out that there's like class 1 bounty hunters are looking for high M count targets, and they have to go to Ventress to find out that means the Force. How does some random fuck off on this planet know that if he saw a Force powered baby, he needs to call the bounty hunter tip line
Yeah.
to be like, is he? I have to headcanon. I get that it's so the plot can move.
Yeah.
I have to headcanon that this guy's like a weird bounty hunter Reddit user. Like,
Right,
this is
yeah.
the section of the HoloNet that he's on, that he just sort of knows these things.
Yeah, I guess it's just people who are paying attention, like, or he's probably one of those guys who's like doing anything for like a little extra buck, you know? And so one of the things is he does follow these kind of like inroads to like, oh, the Empire is looking for these
Is bounty
targets.
Hold on. Is bounty hunter putting bounty hunter stuff online and trying to get people to do it? Is that like crypto Twitter? Are people getting like promoted tweets on their HoloNet feed that's like,
I don't know.
if you see this, call this bounty hunter. Don't call the police or anything. Don't call the authorities. Call a bounty hunter.
Or this particular person knows the particular bounty hunter that will appear in the next section and was asked by that particular bounty hunter, if you see X kind of target at any point in time while on your travels throughout your life, let me know first because I'm the premier catcher person.
I think they're not allowed to do that. And the reason I think they're not allowed to do that is because this guy had to call in a tip line specifically and ask for a class 1 bounty hunter.
Okay,
he doesn't
that's
say
true.
a particular bounty hunter, he says
Right.
class 1. So I think if I'm reading the scene right, the way that this has to work under the Empire is you have to call in a tip if you know that there's like a particular thing that broadly bounty hunters are looking for. You call in a tip,
Right.
and then they get the little scanner from the Mandalorian. I wonder if this is how they get the bio data. I
yeah.
also wonder if it has to do with like the chain code information that we saw all the way back in season 1. This is me hyper over analyzing this one scene where the guy calls in a tip.
Right, just because
I'm like, how does this work exactly? I need to know, like, personally how this works.
And I like how the other two people that noticed it or saw something similar, they were like, we don't talk about that kind of stuff because it attracts unwanted attention.
They're
right?
doing the right thing.
Right, exactly. They're
I
like,
saw
nah,
nothing.
I saw nothing. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
The evil empire is looking for children that can do weird stuff. I saw a kid doing weird stuff. No, I didn't.
Right. The other
That's
crazy
the
thing,
correct call to make in that situation.
the other crazy thing is that the Aqualish literally lives next door
Oh,
to
yeah.
them. He's like their direct neighbor. So I'm confused because I'm like, A, would he not have like just known they always lived there anyway, like next door? Or like is he just maybe he's just like that's like a place that he goes to like make calls or something. I really don't know what that place is.
You have to imagine what happens if you call in and you're wrong and somebody like Boba Fett shows up, the
Right.
no disintegrations guy shows up and you just wasted his time.
That's true.
I imagine you probably have to know for sure that something went down before you call a class 1 bounty hunter.
I agree.
Anyway, we cut to Dr. Royce Hemlock, and he's in this like so it's a different place than the creepy red containers that we saw all the way back in Shadows of Tantus. But we don't see like what the inside looks like. And it's like, ooh, what is this? It's a mystery. It's the clones. It's the
Right.
CX troopers.
Yeah, it's
We
not
see
nice.
multiple times through the episode him poking around at the data pad and he's looking at the CX troopers. Which I do think is weird that we never really see the faces of the CX troopers. We
Right.
saw one back in season 2, but we don't get the way it's treated is this is treated as some sort of big mystery. Like the helmet is off. Who could it be? I think this is the weirdness of the shot in my mind because it's shot like, oh, this is a big mystery. We're not showing you what's in this tube. It must be a person we know. And then surprise, it's absolutely nobody we know.
Yeah, it's just random clones. Like it doesn't
It's
really
just
matter.
random
Like,
clones.
yeah.
That's my thing with that like, sort of untwist. It's
Yeah.
weird the way that there's nothing like objectively wrong with this, but it feels weird because of the way this is directed and because it's signaling to the audience with the shot composition that we're supposed to think that there's a big mystery here and there's
Right.
not.
Yeah, because like my only headcanon brain thing that I could have come up with that they were trying to keep it a secret was that somehow he was cloning like tech or something, and like that was supposed to be what it was, but like clearly that wasn't
I think
the
tech was
case.
involved somehow.
Right.
I think that they were gonna have some sort of I really think that again with the writing of this season that they basically stripped it down to bare bones and
Yeah.
said, here's what we need. Here's a list of characters we need to bring back very briefly. And there we go. Like, but I do feel like this was the CX Trooper plot was meant to go somewhere that it didn't go. And they wind up kind of being a foil to the batch, and it sort of works pretty well in the finale. But the way that the episodes leading up to it are written and shot, it makes it think like there's some big mystery when it's not. Anyway, Dr. Carr makes a pretty hilarious, like, immediate power grab when she's like, I want to be the chief scientist. And Hemlock is like,
Okay.
sure,
Sure. Loves it.
fine.
Yep.
Anyway, let me start by briefing you on our single most classified project.
Okay, wait. This is the part. Okay, so this is my thing. This is why I even bothered to
It's so
really
funny.
bring this
It's
up.
so
Okay.
funny.
So she's like, "Hey, Nala is in prison. Give me her job. I need to be. I've literally been with you since the beginning. Like, you need to promote me anyway, because I've just been like your little assistant. Now, just make me like, give me a promotion." So he gives her the promotion. Immediately walks into the vault, and she looks up and she sees the other doctors observing the vault. And I'm like, so do all these people know what Project Necromancer is? And then just like, is the actual Project Necromancer a secret, but the kids in the vault, that's something that everybody knows, but they don't know why they're there.
I think there's layers of secrecy. I think that people know that there's kids in the vault, but only on a need to know basis. So people who are working specifically with Nala Se in this particular department knew.
Okay.
Emerie Carr was doing blood testing. She was handling the lab that was actually testing the blood. So
Right.
she was need to know because she wasn't chief scientist. Obviously, Nala Se couldn't do all this by herself. She had to have people like Dr. Scalder in there
Right.
to be able to assist her, and particularly in the transition from Nala Se to Dr. Carr. But I think that Carr's duties at the time, they didn't necessarily lend to her needing to know where the blood samples were going and what they were being tested against. Because she also wasn't in charge of the lab. That was Nala Se's thing. She
Right.
was just sort of managing the lab. So she wasn't like the person the chief scientist in charge of everything. Her duties were specifically in the lab. But I just think it's so funny that they were like, okay, let's start you with the most classified thing.
Yeah, the
No,
most single
no,
most
like,
important thing that
no,
we're doing
like, let
here.
me put this in for approval. Let
Right.
me let me do all of this. And Hemlock's just like, okay, sure.
I mean, I guess if Hemlock is the one making all the decisions, I guess it's just a matter of like, well, why would I bother go through like paperwork to make you think? I'll just be like, you are the chief scientist now. Okay, great. Do we have to send a memo out to all the clone troopers and stormtroopers everywhere? Like,
I
hey
imagine
guys,
he'll send a corporate email out when
corporate
he
email. Congratulations to Dr. Emerie Carr on her promotion this week.
Carr will be taking over effective as of about an hour ago.
Right. I love it so much.
And oops, it's kids in the vault. Would
Yes.
it surprise you to learn, Bradley, when this episode came out, that it was kind of controversial?
I'm not surprised mostly because Star Wars, but
Yes.
also I am surprised in the fact that only because animated shows for at least Star Wars content tend to skew younger adult. I don't want to say like kid because this show definitely is not kid friendly by any stretch of the imagination.
Somewhere between
Yeah,
7 and 12 is around the demographic where Star Wars animation has always liked to live. Or
right.
really, 7 to 14 is where it's liked to live. It's been
Exactly.
that way since the Clone Wars, particularly around season 3 when it took its dark turn. Yeah, people were not happy with these kids in the vault. And I'm like, I mean, I understand seeing kids in danger is upsetting to some people, but within the context of Star Wars, this is a thing that Star Wars animation, and particularly animation, likes to get away with. Palpatine literally kidnaps babies
There's literally
in
a
Children
whole
of the Force.
there's been episodes on this, multiple
And
episodes on
when
different shows.
when this episode came out, I clocked immediately that the kids were getting out of there because basic understanding of how Star Wars as a brand works tells me that these kids are going to get out of here because Star Wars is a fantasy for children.
Right.
And the children escaping from a bad situation using their own wits, which they eventually ultimately do in the finale, that's something that's very Star Wars. And to do that, you have to put the kids in the dangerous situation first. But it's been doing that as far back as episode 1 when it's putting Anakin in the battle in Naboo.
Right.
But
It's a little weird, I guess, seeing children as literal prisoners though. It's a little
it's
odd.
disconcerting. I will say it. I understand why people had a visceral reaction to this episode because it is disconcerting. But there were people who were like, "I'm just going to stop watching the show,"
Yeah, and I
which
think
I
that's a mistake.
understand. I do, but at the same time, like I also understand why the show made the choice to do this.
Right.
Like
I mean,
it tracks with storytelling up to this point. The kids are going to get out, and I do also like. There were some people who said, and this is a perfectly valid take, I'm going to stop watching for now. I'm going to wait until the show's over, and then I'm going to watch the rest of the thing so we can get the kids out of here.
that's fine. I just think like what I think that this episode does really well though is like it makes Emery also have that visceral reaction because she
Yes,
doesn't quite
that's the
get it
point
at
of the
first.
episode.
Right. So she also is very uncomfortable with the fact that they're children. Like she goes, "Oh, these are not specimen," because that's what Hemlock keeps referring them to is specimens. And same thing with Score. She also refers to them as specimens later on in the episode. And it's like she's like, "No, they're kids. These are children." Like it's the same thing with Omega. She looked at Omega differently than everybody else because the other clones were just clones. Like Omega was a child. There's something in her brain that told her like, no, we have to treat Omega differently than we treat the adult clones versus, now these children in this vault.
Well, we kind of know what that thing is because it's mentioned later in the episode. She was treated very badly by Nala Se as a child. And so Dr. Carr is going to be more empathetic towards children in bad situations just because she has endured that kind of upbringing herself, where she was essentially discarded by Nala Se for whatever reason. We still don't know why. And she wound up working for Hemlock. And yeah, that is also kind of the point of the episode is that it is meant to be upsetting that these children are in this situation where they are completely powerless, where this fascist scientific research is being conducted on them. And Carr is like, what the fuck? The Empire is evil. I don't know if people online need that reminder, but the Empire's bad.
Right. I
They
don't think they need
started,
justification for doing
yeah,
anything
they
bad. Like,
started by killing a bunch of people at the Jedi Temple, and it just got worse from there.
yeah.
So, speaking of that, I love the line where they're like, "Well, they basically say force sensitive adults are hard to come by." I wonder why.
Such a strange phenomenon. I don't understand why that would be a thing.
I wonder why that happened.
It's almost like if a couple years ago, it's like you wiped a bunch of
It's
them
almost like
out.
about yeah, it's almost like about a year or two ago you wiped all of them out.
That's crazy.
Whoops. Anyway, I want to talk about the games that the kids are playing because
Okay.
love doing these episodes far after the episodes have come out so I can read the StarWars.com trivia guide. So according to the StarWars.com trivia guide, one of the holographic games seen in the vault is nicknamed Impossible Stack during production. It's a holographic stack and balance game similar to Jenga. Another game, nicknamed Tower Puzzle, features a series of rings that must be rotated and moved to create a clean cylinder shape. End quote. I love that the team keeps like actually making the games that turn up in the show.
And
Like
maybe they
they
should
aren't
just
just
quit being in Star Wars animation, just be at the design team for Disneyland so that they can just
well,
make more products to sell to kids.
I think it's really interesting because they think really hard about what games look like in the Star Wars universe.
Right.
And it goes back to Pazak from Knights of the Old Republic. Pazak is really popular amongst Knights of the Old Republic fans, in part because you can actually play it. I
That'll
have
do it.
played it.
Yeah, that'll do it.
You can actually play Pazak in real life. You can get fan made Pazak cards and you can play them in real life. And so I think it's neat that with the card game we saw in episode 4, and then again now with the games that come up here, that a lot of thought has been put into them and their design. I also love that the games are going to be a plot point later in episode 14.
Okay, little teaser there.
Little teaser, the one of these games, the presence of these games is going to be put to use by a character later on. We do get confirmation that Omega's blood is the binder. That's why they want her blood. It's not that she is particularly force sensitive. That's not necessarily confirmed. It's just for whatever reason, her blood binds much better than the other clone blood,
Correct.
and they can do M count replication. And again, Hemlock mentions that they are scientific assets, nothing more. Goes back to this idea of, are these people, are these assets to be used? Hemlock clearly thinks they're assets. Emerie's not so sure. Because again, she sees the children as children, which is the correct and healthy thing to think of. And Hemlock sees them as assets because he's Joseph Mengele. And his death will be less excruciating than Joseph Mengele's was, but it will be well earned.
Section 2. Back on the Marketplace planet, bounty hunter Cad Bane shows up to kidnap the Tarlafar infant from his home. Bane leaves the mother unconscious and pays off the informant after the abduction. Back on Tantus, Emerie oversees experiments on the children in the vault. One child attempts to escape but is subdued by clone commandos.
Oh, hi, Corey Burton and Seth Green, reprising their roles as Cad Bane and Toto.
Toto.
Toto 360.
I love them so much.
I also love them. There are certain characters that I really think whatever the next show is going to follow chronologically onto this one. Probably going to be about something different, but we're going to see characters recur. And I do feel like Toto and Cad Bane are being set up to continue to recur.
Yeah, they're just like great. Like, there's something like, because now we know where Cad Bane's story ends in Book of Boba Fett. Spoiler alert, I guess, if you haven't seen Book of Boba Fett. That's where his story ends. And then this
I
is,
completely forgot he was in the Book of Boba Fett.
oh, well, there you go. I just reminded everybody.
Thank you for reminding me. I need to go back and give Book of Boba Fett a rewatch. It's
Yeah.
been a hot minute since I've watched or thought about that show.
But what I like about what Book of Boba Fett did was gave us a very strict timeline of where Cad Bane can show up again, right? So now we know that he can show up from any point in time from literally the Clone Wars all the way up until post Mandalorian. Like, so he can show up any point in time in that giant span of years. And so that's great because now we can use him for other shows if it's set in between, obviously, the original trilogy, The Mandalorian, and the Bad Batch. But it is what it is.
Just as a reminder, Cad Bane is being voiced by absolute legend Corey Burton, who let's just look at the number of acting credits that he
It's
has.
probably too many, honestly.
486, but he is the voice of Disney,
Voice of
basically.
Disney.
He's the voice that you hear when you ride the tram into Disneyland. He's the new ghost host. He's in fucking everything.
That's crazy to me.
And now here he is again. I also do like that this is very important, and this was very important to my partner when we watched the show. The baby does get to keep his little plushie.
Well, that's because Toto is not a nanny droid, but successfully prevents the child from crying by giving him his toy. I just thought that was really funny.
Toto is me every time I have to interact with a baby. It's like, I don't know what I'm
It's
doing.
like, I don't know what
Here,
that is. Yeah, here, take this. And
here,
he's like,
take
I
your
did
fucking
it.
toy and shut up.
Oh my God. Toto's so funny. And I love how Toto also, on the one hand, you feel like you get the sense that Toto has some kind of like conscious, like not that like I mean he's a droid, so obviously, technically he's not supposed to have too much of a, feelings, but you can kind of tell he understands like, oh, we're kidnapping a baby. Like he kind of
He
feels
gets
bad.
it.
Yeah, he's like, ooh, I mean, I don't want to be doing this, but Cad's telling me to do this, so I kind of have to.
Well,
Like,
Mr. Bane has said to do this,
that's
so I
right,
suppose
exactly.
we will have to. I love how shitty Bane is too about the like he just tosses the credits at the guy.
He just threw it
Like,
at him
here you
too.
go fuck yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I guess when you're kidnapping babies, it's really not like that you're not showing any favoritism towards one informant over the other. You're like, well, you just sold out a fucking baby, so like fuck you too, I guess.
Meanwhile, back at Tantus, the kid, Ava, is asking really just normal kid questions. I like the way that the kids are written in this show.
Okay.
Because they're not stupid, but they are very young. And so when they ask questions like kids would ask. Like,
Right. When do
when
I
do
get
I
to go
get to go
home?
home?
Yeah.
And where's Nala say? So they have kind of an understanding of the situation, but they don't really understand the situation. Speaking of understanding the situation, Jax did have the right idea for how to escape.
He was very perceptive. He was like,
He was
okay,
very perceptive.
I
He had
need the data
identified
pad.
that the
Yep.
data pad is what you do, which is how
Uh-huh.
Omega got out.
That's right. So he's definitely thinking on his toes for sure.
Yeah, he's not wrong. He does get stunned and it doesn't
Yeah.
work out for him. I find it interesting. So there's this moment where Emerie's trying to talk this kid down.
Right.
And Scorch shows up and Scorch stuns Jax.
Scorch does what Scorch does.
Emery's pissed, and Scorch is basically like, well, there's a protocol in place for this.
Right.
And I'm just going to read my note. Quote, even as chief scientist, the protocol extends beyond Carr's influence, and the system is beyond her ability to change. And that's the lesson of this scene.
Well, it's interesting because like in the first scene we saw, she's like, "Oh, I'm chief science officer now. So that means I'm in charge. I have all this power now, right?" And then
Right.
Scorch just reminded her that no matter what happens, you have no power here. Like,
The system of
yeah,
oppression is beyond you.
right.
The system is so far above one person that one person, even in a position of authority, can't jerk it in a different direction so suddenly.
Right.
That Scorch's orders and protocols is laid down by Hemlock, which is built into this system of oppression. That's beyond Carr's ability to make a hard change like that, make a hard pivot. Because Scorch is going to do what Scorch does. He's going to follow the protocols that were laid down by Hemlock and laid down by the Imperial military. So there's really nothing that Carr can do on that level to change how the system is going to react to this kid trying to escape.
Yeah, the crazy part is where she goes like, that was unnecessary because like they're just children or whatever. And then Scorch was like, no, these are specimen. Like they're this is why we do what we do because they're just science experiments. Like,
and again, you can't change the mentality of the people in the system either. The people who were elevated to positions within this oppressive system are there for a reason. They are there because they are the type of person who is going to wholesale buy into what Hemlock is selling. And that is that these are not children, these are specimens. Fuck them. Who cares? They don't have humanity. And my last note for this section is I think Emerie believes what she's saying because, again, she thinks she's the chief scientist and she has a bunch of power when she tells Ava that Jax is not going to be in trouble.
right.
I think she really believes this. Bad move to tell a kid everything's going to be fine when it's quite definitively not going to be fine. And she was kind of shoved into this position. She was given no time to acclimate to the documentation. Like, oh man, that sucks. This episode is brutal to watch.
But that's what makes it good.
That's what makes it good. That's what makes it so good. It's because it's brutally oppressive to watch.
Section 3. Emerie visits Nalase in her cell, discussing Project Necromancer and the children's fate, with Emerie expressing her powerlessness to do anything about it. Later, she sees Hemlock, who informs her on a new specimen arriving. She volunteers to accompany Scorch to ensure that the specimens are properly maintained at every stage.
Even Nalase refers to them as specimens.
It's so sad because like when in the earlier scene when Ava's like, "Oh, Nalase, like where is she?" Like, like they almost see her as like this like not a nanny, but like a motherly figure or something, right? Like someone who's taking care of them in some capacity. And she's like a babysitter almost. And Nalase still is referring to them all as just like, "Nah, these are just science experiments." Like
Even Nalase, like Nalase's whole thing throughout, she's one of my favorite characters in the show. Her whole thing throughout the entire show, and she will mention it later in this conversation when she's like, I did what I could to protect Omega, but like the others, there wasn't really much I could do. She literally only cares about Omega. Like, she's like, oh, I did what I could for the other kids, but the only one she's going to put anything on the line for is Omega. And that's how she operates, which is a really messed up way to look at things. And even when she talks about Emerie, like, Emerie clearly has beef with Nalase because Nalase got rid of her for whatever reason we don't know.
Right. So like Emerie was like the proto Omega, I guess. Like that was
I
like the
guess.
or like the very first assistant she had or something, or at least it's alluded to that that might be the case. Like I'm not quite
Yeah.
sure how that went down because obviously, but does that also mean that Emerie's a fast growing clone versus a non?
There are so many questions that we don't know at this stage.
Because that would make sense if you think about it. Because then if she's only like 4 or 5 years old or however
I
the
think
fuck
the
old,
counterpoint to that is that Omega doesn't know who she is. So she
right,
had to predate Omega. She's clearly
right.
about 10 years older than Omega is.
Yeah, because if Omega's
So for
naturally
whatever
10
reason,
or 50, or she's like, what, how, I don't even know how old Omega is, honestly.
oh, she has to be a fast growing clone because it's only been 10 years or so since the clones. Does this mean it's so confusing? We
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know.
right.
We don't know. We have no idea
And
what's.
that's one of my things about this episode that I thought could have been strengthened would have been like, especially during this conversation, they could have drawn this conversation out a little bit more and we could have learned some of that information, right? Like, or we could have gotten a mini flashback or like something along those lines where like Emerie just has like this quick flash of her being a young, trainee clone or whatever with Nalase, and then something along those lines where she was just kind of like discarded very early on. And then Omega was selected because reasons we don't know, and Omega just is the unaltered clone, so she is just naturally growing, and that's like the 10ish 12 years that Nalase had her basically. I don't know, it's really hard to, or maybe even Emerie knew Omega before she was like, if she's a natural growing clone, maybe Emerie took care of Omega at some point, like, I don't know, there's just so many questions.
I'm yeah. And the thing is the show has to be so economical with its third season
It
that
sucks.
it's taken a meat cleaver to specific lines. Like,
No, I'm so mad because if this had had like a natural 5 season arc, like I feel like we could have gotten all these answers
yeah,
easily.
if the show had been as long as it felt like they were planning the show to be, then we would have gotten a lot more of these answers. And, I can put my conspiracy theory hat on and say, give any number of reasons why I think that the show was cut short, but I definitely feel like the show was cut short
For sure.
for whatever reason. My final note is the Emerie and Hemlock scene when somebody walks up and is like, hey, so Tarkin wants to have a word with you. And I'm like, oh boy.
Oh,
Oh
it's gonna be
boy.
good.
This is going to be good. Whatever's about to happen is going to be great.
Section 4. In his office, Dr. Hemlock faces scrutiny after a call from Governor Tarkin over resource allocation to Tantus Base. Hemlock justifies the expenditures for the projects for the Emperor, but is warned by Tarkin about the consequences of failure. After,
Hemlock contacts CX2 for an update. He states he tracked down and interrogated a Trandoshan. She gave up the name of the pirate Omega has been associating with. Hemlock warns the other operatives are not ready to join CX2 in the field, but CX2 insists he can handle the matter on his own. Hemlock reminds him of his past failures and warns him not to return without Omega.
We then get the single bitchiest scene in the entire third season of the show. Everything that these two say to each other, every piece of body language that Hemlock and Tarkin have with each other is just throwing shade left and right. The fact that Hemlock gets told he has to call in, and then Tarkin's in the middle of something when he calls in, and he has to wait for Tarkin to turn around and talk to him. Like, it's crazy. And then Tarkin's like, you're spending a lot of money
Right.
on this project. Money that we could put toward my pet projects. So where's all this money going? And Hemlock's over here like, the Emperor said I could. And it's like, Dad said I could, so... And Tarkin's like, uh-huh. What are you actually doing in there?
And he's like, well, that's classified. I can't tell you. And then Tarkin's like, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see about that whole classified thing.
Right, exactly.
I love when Tarkin is shitty.
Well, if you think about it, so far, every other quote unquote project that Tarkin has like been like, let me see what this is about. He's either A, taken it over, or B, like it's gone away, and then the funds reallocated to his thing that he's doing, which I find interesting, like every single time that's happened.
Yeah, he clearly wants to divert funds to Project Stardust. Like
Right. He took it away from
clear,
all the other ones, and it's just weird.
because that was the beef between him and Thrawn. Well, really,
Right.
it was Krennic at that point and Thrawn, but like Tarkin was involved in that. Thrawn's like, "Hey, I've got these like TIE fighters that are actually going to be decent. Like this could work." And Krennic's like, "What if giant death ball?"
Right.
And Tarkin's like, Krennic is making a compelling case here."
And whereas I think Hemlock's his kind of project is Necromancer is probably a little more important to the Emperor. Personally, I feel like Stardust is a more big picture kind of project that needs to get done first. Even though I know that Necromancer is more of a long game project, I can see like even if let's just say Tarkin knew about all of the projects, which he clearly doesn't necessarily know about this one, but let's just say he did, he would probably still justify like, oh, you're spending too much money on Necromancer versus Stardust right now. Like,
it also goes back to, we talked about in episode 3 that the thing about empires is that whatever the Emperor is really interested in, or no, we talked about this in the Darth Vader comics. Where
right.
they were like, we're not going to destroy Mon Cala because the Emperor likes their ballet. The thing about empires is if whatever the Emperor's whims are, that's now Imperial doctrine. Whatever he likes, that's what's going to be sticking around. And so we see here, Necromancer is very important to the Emperor, but not to the Empire. And Tarkin is being super bitchy and shitty in this scene, but also he kind of has a point. The amount of money that's flowing into Project Necromancer, and not even to Project Necromancer, just to Tanta's base. Tarkin doesn't know about Project Necromancer. He only knows that Hemlock is doing experiments on clones at Tanta's base. He doesn't know what those experiments are, and on top of that, he's right to be concerned because some of that money's going into Hemlock's pet death squad.
Right. And he's thinking
It's
like,
not even going to Necromancer. It's going to him building more of his little death people.
yeah, it's not economically sound for the Empire. It just doesn't make sense to be like, oh, let's just say there's a secret project, but then there's also this elite trooper project that we're doing. And it's like, that's not really like something we want to invest in right now. We don't really need like 5 special clones, or like clones are done. Like we've clearly seen that like, Tarkin, other people are over clones. Like they're like, fuck the clones. The Stormtrooper project is much more economical and people are very willingly, signing up to put their lives on the line. So why are we bothering doing clone stuff anymore? Like, let's just move on.
Right. It's interesting. The Imperial dynamics are so interesting to me.
Oh, but again, and this is why I've brought this up before, is an Imperial Academy or an Imperial like just Imperials show would be so good. It'd be so Game of Thrones-esque, like West Wing bullshit. Like it would be so good because it would
I
just
still
bitchy
want
people.
I still want the West Wing and the Imperial Senate show.
I'm telling you, it would just.
Although probably, would be even better?
What's that?
Veep in the Imperial Senate.
Oh, like an actual comedy?
Like it's funny,
I
Like
don't know if I
the
could
whole
do
point
that.
of
That'd be
Veep,
really funny.
the whole point of Veep, like the point of the show is that politicians are presented always with like this gravitas and this deep center, and they're very like classic politician people. And Veep is just like, nah, they're all swearing and drinking and fucking each other.
Yeah, they're terrible.
They're terrible people.
They're terrible
You have
people.
to be a fucking megalomaniac to want this. And that's the genius of Veep. And I think it'd be really fun to see, like, in the Imperial Senate, the type of either person who, like Bail Organa or Mon Mothma, like, is from the old guard and, like, from this era where politicians were these very serious people. And you have a bunch of people that are, like, just Imperial lickspittles who suck at their jobs and are fully aware that we're just here to rubber stamp whatever the Emperor is going to do.
Yeah, I guess they kind of hinted at that in The Mandalorian season 3 when we saw Pershing and he was like dealing with when he gave his like little speech and
Yeah,
he
when he
was
was
like,
dealing with the career politicians and they were
yeah, and they were
like,
all like, "Oh my God,"
I
like,
can't even tell the difference between the
right, yeah,
Empire
yeah, yeah,
and the
yeah.
New Republic. And it's like, oh my God.
Yikes. Yeah, no,
That
I feel like
episode
that's a similar
randomly
thing.
came out of nowhere and was really good. Okay, so the CX trooper mentions that they tracked down a Trandoshan, Sid, and they got information on Fee. I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that this is the last time we're going to hear about Sid.
I think
I
it
know
is.
this episode's really long, but I'm going to bring this up anyway. I have beef with the absence of Sid in this season. I think it's a bad choice that retroactively makes the other two seasons worse. And I have two main reasons. I have two main issues with the fact that Sid's only purpose in this season is to be squeezed for information that will screw the batch over.
Right.
Issue number one, she had an entire arc in the first two seasons where she had a moral conflict in between whether or not she was, because in the first season she was very like, the batch is just assets for me, I'm just going to deploy them to make myself money, they have no choice, I'm blackmailing them, I suck. And then in season 2 we got a lot more depth to her. And yes, the thing was still like, you really shouldn't be trusting Sid. But also she had this relationship with Omega. And particularly at the end of season 1, she gained this relationship and this understanding with Omega. And at the end of season 2, she betrays them to the Empire to save her own skin, right? Even if they had not gone with the obvious option, which is to say, you know, maybe Sid comes back and helps them in the finale, like I thought she was going to do, and she didn't. Even if you drive home the point of Sid specifically should not have been trusted to the degree that she was, and she comes to understand that, or Omega comes to understand that, or there was some closure on that, that would have been one thing. But it just ends with her screwing them over. After 2 seasons of character development, she screws them over, and that's it. Batch never reconciles with this. Omega, who was in Sid's corner the entire time, never reconciles with this in the course of this season. So all that character development, none of it comes into play. There's not a moment in this episode or this season where Omega is particularly apprehensive because she remembers Sid, or she runs into somebody that she's hesitant to trust because now she understands. Like, none of that is dealt with. Sid's only purpose and all of that art in the first 2 seasons is purely for the purpose of Sid screwing them over, and then she has this information so you can get them to move season 3 along. And I think she really got the act. She was the biggest chump, that they were really planning to do something with her in the back third of this. Yeah. And that just got chopped away. That they were, maybe there would have been a whole episode that they were planning to finally put that character to rest. But she was such a major character in the first 2 seasons. And the way that it's handled here, it's like, well, what was the point of that? Like, within the context of the broad story, the Bad Batch is one broad story. What was the point of having this character be such a big deal in the first 2 acts of this story? And then in the 3rd act, she's not there. We've learned no lessons from it. It has no impact on Omega's character that we can see, and we never reconcile with it. And the other big issue that I have is that in the finale, these 2 issues go hand in hand. In the finale, the only heroic people in the finale episode are clones, or the children, or the Zilla Beast. We'll get there when we get there. But the adults in that episode are all clones. And yes, it's nice to bring the focus back to the Bad Batch. And yes, Fee helps them out in episode 14, but in that, or episode 13, Juggernaut. But in the finale 2 episodes in particular, everyone who isn't a clone screws them in some way. or is not really a good person, with the possible exception of Nala Se. We'll get to her when we get to her. But while on the one hand, I like the fact that the finale episode is about the clones stepping up and taking care of their own, etc., etc., I have issues with it when paired up with what seems to be the moral lesson of Sid's role in the story, which is you shouldn't trust people. You should be very careful who you trust. This inadvertently kind of makes the moral lesson and moral core of the show. You need to look out for your own in-group because nobody else is going to do that. And I think the way that it was handled, that doesn't land quite the way it needs to. Particularly since we have all these characters that have helped them out throughout the show and none of them come back to help in the finale. The clones really are on their own. This is my issue with the treatment of Sid in the third season. Even if they had wanted to go that route, the way that it was handled broadly in the context of the season feels like such a glaring omission that from a writing standpoint, it's confusing to me why it was handled that way. And I don't like it. It's my major beef with the season, that we're not going to deal with this in any substantive way. And it's going to add a bitter note to the finale and where the show ends up. That was my Sid rant that I've been saving for 11
No,
episodes.
I'm glad that you brought it up. I mean, that's why I try to make sure I mentioned it in my summary too, because I was like, this is the only time we're going to get to talk about it.
He's going to go off on one about it.
Yeah, because the only time we're going to get to talk about her. And I agree with you. I think this is just, unfortunately, this is the things that they had to shave off this season just to kind of sum it up in 3 seasons. Unfortunately, Sid is the biggest offender of that shaving off stuff. I would argue that Fee gets a little bit shafted in this only because she's barely, I mean, she's in one episode really. I mean, she's kind of in a previous, she's earlier in the season a little bit, but like she only has a true major role in that one Juggernaut episode, and that's really it. And that she doesn't really do much other than, you know what I mean? Like just
she's kind of support. She's playing support in that role. She does get a very sick moment with the atmosphere, and we'll talk about that. Like she gets to be cool. She gets to turn up.
But it's not as offensive as Sid's role this season. I will say that. Like it's, and say honestly, even Rex also kind of gets a little bit of a shaft this season. And I don't know if that, I mean, I do know because it's from the fact that they weren't getting another season after this. And I think that if they had at least one more, I think it would have been fine. I think they could have wrapped these things up nicely, and it would have maybe, even if you did a slightly shorter 4th season, which is why I still think that a Bad Batch movie would have been a better quote ending for this series.
I think that if you did, and the final episode's 50 minutes long, which means our recording's going to be like 2.5 hours. That's okay. I'm prepared for it. But like right now at this present point when we're recording it, this is what these things feel like. I think the show was set up to be a spiritual successor for Clone Wars. And for whatever reason, because it got cut short, they were planning it to be this like 4 or 5 season show. And also the 3rd season got abbreviated. And so I think that if they had done like, well, we're going to do a 15 episode season to wrap up the Bad Batch plot. And then we're going to do like a movie to kind of finish off the rest of the stuff. And then we move on to a new era, move on to a totally different story. That would have been fine for me. But I think as it currently stands, like they wrapped up the Batch's plot pretty nicely. Particularly Crosshair, like they did an incredible job with Crosshair. But a lot of these side characters, really got shafted. And Rex in particular too, because he loses his entire operation on Teth, and then that never gets brought up again.
Right.
Like that's the end of that story. Is he spent all this time putting these clones together, and we spent so much time setting up that clones were able to rebel against the Empire, and then they all got wiped out on Teth, and that's the end of it. Like when I say I want to see more storytelling in a particular era, right? I want that statement to be because I'm excited about the things that I have and I want to see more of it. What I don't want that to be is I felt like this was undercooked and it needed to go back in the oven. That's the bad version of I want to see more in this of these characters in this era. And that's what we're getting here, I feel like, with this season. And I don't know if they're trying to set up another show, or they know that there's going to be another show, or the Bad Batch just wasn't working the way that they thought. That's my theory, honestly, is that the Bad Batch just wasn't doing what they thought it was, that they really wanted to hammer on this Clone Wars nostalgia.
Yeah.
And it just didn't prove to be what they thought it was going to be. And so I don't know. I don't want to be too down because like I generally like the season, but this is the major sticking point. I'm glad it's coming in the middle of an episode that I liked. So hopefully it can soften this blow. But this is the two biggest issues that I have with this season are the excitement of Sid, which I think retroactively makes the entire first two seasons worse in hindsight, knowing this is where the story's going to go. And then also the lack of any sort of definitive closure for Tech in this season. That's present through the season, and I like that. But having now seen the whole season, those are my two big issues. Is that we do never really get a moment to mourn Tech or to honor Tech, except for very, very end. At the very, very end of the finale, we'll get to it when we get to it, which was a moment I did like, and I thought redeemed that a little bit for me. But anyway, I think we've dwelled on this thing that I don't like for far too long. Let's get back to a thing that I do like. Bradley, next section, please.
And finally, section 5. Emerie and Scorch meet up with Cad Bane to inspect the child's specimen. Emerie is visibly shocked about how young the child is. She tests the child's blood before paying Bane for his services. Back in the vault, Emerie discovers that Jax has been put in isolation as punishment for his escape attempt. Emerie attends to a sad Ava, who says that Emerie lied about Jax not being punished and that they all just want to go home. Later, while doing some blood tests, Emerie finds Omega's old doll, and as consolation, she gives the doll to Ava.
Notice Cad Bane is the only person to refer to the kid as a kid.
Because you know what? He's no bullshitter. He doesn't
He's
really
no
care.
bullshitter.
Which is why I like Cad Bane, because he has a true, like, I think that's what makes him an actual villain, is that he doesn't have a moral quandary, right? He's just kind of like, no, I'm being paid
He knows
for
what's
what I'm
up.
doing. Yeah, I'm being paid. So I do not care. I don't care if it's a kid. I don't care if it's an old lady. Like, this is what I was paid to do, and I did the job because I'm good at my job.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting that he has no particular dog in this fight. So like he like smells Emerie's doubts from a mile away and kind of warns her about them, but he doesn't care.
Yeah.
He has no interest in this. I love him so much as a villain. I am glad he is still alive and we have him for future storytelling. Because he makes a really interesting like baseline bounty hunter of this is kind of the perfect bounty hunter character as a villain. I like that Emerie has to physically confront the child that she misled. I think that's a really powerful scene. Because now this child, right, sees her as part of the oppressive system.
Right. Doesn't trust her as much. Yeah.
Doesn't trust her. So now Emerie, who has this entire episode been advocating for these kids, trying to talk Jax down, trying to insist that people refer to them as children and treat them like children, is now being seen because the system sucks this hard. She is being seen as part of the system, even though she's trying desperately to advocate for these kids. Also, the Kiners really sell it with the music.
As I would love that you keep reminding us, but yes.
I will keep reminding till the end of time that the Kiners do the music and the music kicks ass.
That's right.
And my final note is I found it interesting that at the end of the episode when Carr has her first little bit of rebellion, well, her second little bit of rebellion, right? She gave the doll back to Omega.
That's true.
That was her first moment of rebellion.
Hint. Yeah. And then now.
Her first moment of rebellion, her second moment of rebellion carries on that same thread when she gives the doll to Ava. Because it's the continuation. Omega had her little rebellion by making the doll. Then Emerie had her little rebellion by giving the doll back to Omega, even though it was confiscated. And so now Emerie's continuing that thread of rebellion within herself. And it all started with Omega. Again, it goes back to this episode is about seeing the Omega's impact on Emerie Carr. It's really good. It's such good writing. Bradley, what are your final thoughts on this episode?
Final thoughts are, this is kind of what I consider to be the beginning of the finale, right? I consider like this episode to kind of be the starting point for what we're calling, I guess, the final arc of the season. I think there's two kind of arcs. I think there's that first arc and it ends with Harbinger. I think that's kind of like where it kind of is like a sticking point. And then I think this episode and then moving forward is like one big story, right? It's like the next 5 episodes are really like this big like finale kind of esque thing. They just build on each other each episode. So we're going to get this like kind of building momentum. This was such a great start point for that. I think that this latter half of the season, to me, I like better only because it's more cohesive. I still love the first half of the first half, if that makes sense. I like the first 4-ish episodes, 4 or 5 episodes. I think those are a great complete story. And then this middle arc is kind of lesser. I don't think it's as good. And then I think this final bit is where this show has true strength. Albeit it does suffer from what we were talking about, the cuts, the things that they
Right.
took out. It does suffer. I will give it. I can't be 100% on, especially with like this episode. I feel like there were things that were cut to make even this episode smaller. Like there was just things that they took out that they could have left in, like i.e. they could have even showed us the scene where he interrogates Sid. Just throw that in there, honestly. I mean, just to have Sid have a presence in the season, if not just to say it off screen. Like he doesn't even say her name, he just says Trandoshan. Like
And
that
even
just
if
is terrible.
Yeah, even if like the direction they went with Sid's arc was Sid gets her comeuppance, which
Right.
I don't know I would have liked, but the fact that it happens off screen and I can't keep talking about
No. But
I cannot keep
what I'm
talking
saying.
about that.
Right. So what I'm saying is I liked this episode. I think that it did a great job. I think it's a concise little mini story for Emerie. I think we needed this for her character because whereas I like the hints that we were getting in the first couple episodes of this, I think this episode was truly necessary to show her turn and her character's arc. And it was very important, and it was a very great episode.
I love this episode a whole lot. It's my final thought. And no, I agree with you in the sense that I think that this is sort of the beginning of the finale. That from here on out, this is basically the finale arc. And it's one cohesive arc. Everything kind of works together to build to the finale. And so I'm very excited to continue to get through this, and not just so that we can talk about something that isn't the Bad Batch.
Right.
God, I want to do episodes that are about different things, but we keep having to catch up on the current TV shows. I'm so tired. Anyway, what are we doing next week, Bradley?
Next week, very fittingly, the episode is called Point of No Return.
And what episode? It's episode 12, right?
Episode 11.
11, okay. Season 1, episode 11, Pluggables. Bradley makes reality TV shows. You can find them on Peacock and Bravo. We only promote one at a time because he's done so many, and we are currently promoting The Circle on Netflix. You can watch the entire season 6 and the reunion on Netflix. You can also find me on the Star Wars TTRPG podcast set in the High Republic called For Light and Dice, but you can hear me on that show. If you're enjoying The Acolyte and you want more Star Wars High Republic storytelling, For Light and Dice, great entry point because we will actually cover some of the plot points in Light of the Jedi and Into the Dark. And so that actually makes a good starting point. I also write gay thriller mystery novels, and I have an announcement about that, actually.
Ooh.
That I was supposed to do last week. Bradley, you might have noticed Bradley had to do the opening stinger. So I was going to say this in the stinger that I was going to record, but I had no time to figure out how to record a stinger on my phone because I didn't have my recording or anything. But the second book in the series, which is called Second Shoot, that's going to be out August the 3rd. On Kindle. So the pre-order for that will be out within the next week or two, and you can pick that up there. Bradley will get his copy probably in about a week.
That's so funny. I just love the title. Sorry. I was like
Second
laughing
shoot.
really in my head. The second shoot.
Yeah. Wait till you find out what the third one's titled. Because I had actually no. Wait till you find out what the finale one's titled. Because I had a lot of fun with that finale.
I love it.
But that book will be out August the 3rd, and if you want to search for the first one, Beach House Studios. It's on Amazon Kindle. Ideally, fingers crossed, I'm going to try to do a sale for it, or like a giveaway before the second book comes out, but that's coming. I'm just very busy and tired. All right. Well, we'll see you next week for the Point of No Return. And Bradley, please run the socials. Thank you for listening to this episode of Gold Squadron Gaze. Did Charles fuck something up? Email us at goldsquadrongaze@gmail.com to let us know. You can also find us on Twitter at @GoldSquadGaze, and you can find us on TikTok and Instagram at @GoldSquadronGaze. You can also find us on YouTube at our Gold Squadron Gaze YouTube channel, where we post full episodes of this show. Finally, if you liked the show, don't forget to rate us and give us a review on your favorite podcast platform. That allows other people to find our show. As always, thank you for listening to Gold Squadron Gaze, and we'll see you next week.
I mean, I've been to Dragon Con, but like I've never like paid for Dragon Con, if that makes sense. Like I've never like had to pay for a ticket and then like walk. I just walked around because it was just like, it's in the city, so it's not like there's
Bradley,
really that
just
many
say you
bars.
had a grinder hookup in the hotel room.
I did not. I've
You
never,
did not. You have
never.
never. Hold on. You have never had a grinder hookup in a downtown hotel room, or specifically not during Dragon Con.
During Dragon Con, I have
There we
never
go.
had a
There we go.